When you're an accountant and you're doing people's books, you start seeing that, how businesses work and the kind of money they turn. And you start realizing that, there is opportunities out there. Numbers don't lie, if you want to put it that way. So when you start doing numbers and you start looking at numbers for people, you start realizing which businesses have opportunities and have the ability to, create something for you, or you create something for that sector. So when you say, people take emotionally attached to brands, yes, there is that mistake with a lot of founders. We realize we change very quickly. You need to adapt. You need to make what sells, right? That's the key here. You need to make what sells and what you can and have the ability to sell. For example, I may not be very good at selling wall clocks, right? But I'm very good at selling water, right? So you have to know what you can sell. That's a key factor, in succeeding. Well, look, funding in the old days was, even now, I think for SMEs, it's very harsh. It's a harsh environment. And unfortunately, Zambia hasn't changed from to a large extent, to the model of having 1.5 times the cover of the loan. So, for example, if you want to borrow 100,000, you must put 150 down in security, with cash, with money at the bank, with your house or property or whatever it is.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Pivot, the podcast where we bring you honest, unfiltered journeys from Africa's entrepreneurs and innovators.
I'm Kabwela Malupande, joined by my co-host Martin Vitek. Each episode, we dive deep into the realities of building and growing businesses on our continent. Let's get started. This is Beyond the Pivot.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Beyond the Pivot podcast, a podcast that takes you across the African continent on a journey, spotlighting some of the news across the continent and bringing to you amazing entrepreneurs, investors, and ecosystem builders on the continent. Our guest today is Ashu Sagar. Very excited to host him today. Ashu is the former president of the Zambia Association of Manufacturers and a co-founder of Caribbean Beverages, where he has spent over 2 decades championing the pulse of local industrialization with a background in accounting and a global perspective that was shaped by his early education through the United World Colleges. He brings a pragmatic lens to how Zambia can shift from a resource extractive economy to a value-added manufacturing powerhouse. His journey from starting his first corporate job at 17 to mortgaging his first home to build a household brand like Aquavita reflects a bold commitment to taking a risk on yourself and a belief that the private sector must not just react to economic shifts, but help shape them. We're happy to have you, Ashu, and welcome to Beyond the Pivot.
Thanks, Kabwela. It's good to be here.
Awesome. To get us started, and you asked me this question as well. I'm curious. So you have built one of Zambia's most recognizable water brands. And so I would like you to be honest. When you go to a restaurant and they serve you a competitor's brand, do you drink it politely? Or do you find yourself instinctively checking their labels or finding out what they're doing right or wrong?
Well, when I was ZAM president, I didn't care. I had to care that I wasn't pushing away one of my members' products. So you had to be very diplomatic when you head the organization. But now, it's okay. I sometimes ask very funny questions like, "Oh, you don't have Aquavita?" And you get these things like, "Oh, we're sorry, sir." I said, "Well, then I really can't eat here." So, but then you just to make it light, but you still carry on. It's not anything serious. You still support other brands. It's fine, but where you can, you do ask for your own. When I go for meetings, I carry my own water. So there's things like that you can do where you still promote your own brand and show that you have preference for what you make.
Martin, I think you just said it's a sin to drink competitors' water.
It's a sin. Sometimes you don't have a choice when you might end up in somebody's office and that's what you get. So you're not impolite. It's okay. And we're all friends in the business. I have friends who are competitors, so it's it's okay. It's fine.
And in the end, it's manufacturing, right? So if the goal is to make the manufacturing sector bigger in Zambia, the more manufacturing companies, the better, right? Just like yours and others.
Right. You must look at the bigger picture. It's okay.
I know we would like to touch on your career, which was at around 17, where you started out in accounting. But I'm more curious around your earlier years, right? What was growing up? What did growing up look for you? Did you always envision being an entrepreneur, or was accounting the path that you thought you'd take during your early years?
I mean, Zambia was a very different landscape at the time. I'd say when you say early years, I would say I had my primary education here and then my secondary education at the United World Colleges. I think when you're still 10, you don't really think of too much beyond, getting through a day, going around in your bikes through the roads in Ndola. But I think when you go to secondary school and you start seeing the, the people we would get from different walks of life and different backgrounds, uh, you start realizing that there's more opportunity out there than, you can't be so tunnel visioned to just become an employee, right? But I wouldn't say it was something that was with me in the early years. I wouldn't say that was something that was so obvious, right? Sometimes you get into situations where the environment changes your perception of what you want to do. And I think that's where probably when I started working at 17 and I started, you know, understanding how businesses work, that's when you start realizing that, hey, there's something different to be done here, you know. So it wasn't really from the early years. I'd say it was when I really started working as a trainee accountant. I started seeing, when you're an accountant and you're doing people's books, you start seeing that, how businesses work and the kind of money they turn. And you start realizing that, there is opportunities out there. Numbers don't lie, if you want to put it that way. So when you start doing numbers and you start looking at numbers for people, you start realizing which businesses uh, have opportunities and have the ability to, create something for you, or you create something for that sector.
And I do know that usually, in as much as while you're young, you're not thinking, you're not focused so much on your career goals, right? But was there an
Um,
expectation from the family as to what exactly you would do or become?
um, no, not really. My father was a teacher. He wasn't really like pressuring you to become anything. I wanted to become a doctor, to be honest, at the time. But when I came out of high school and my A levels, I didn't really have the money to go for a college degree. So I ended up basically, working as a trainee accountant and work by day, write exams, and go to school by night. Um, so I don't think there was that expectation that you will uh, become this. We didn't grow up like that. It was like get a good education, do the best you can, and then see where life leads you. It was never like, oh, you're going to become an engineer. You must become an engineer, or you must become a doctor. You must become this. There was nothing like that was instilled in our home. And my elder three brothers are all engineers by profession, right? And it wasn't something that maybe it was something that you think the fourth brother would also become an engineer, which didn't happen, right? So it's not something that was so fierce in our household.
And you mentioned that the environment that shaped you and become entrepreneur was that you did books for other businesses, for other people, essentially. Was it that exposure, you think, to the like reality that people do business, like that's a value? Sorry, that's a good path to go, or was it like more? I can improve this. Like you saw the opportunity to improve that particular business because you saw the books and you were like, I could do this better. What was the motivation there? Because a lot of people just stay accountants, forever. So it's not the regular path to now just move to being entrepreneur afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, there was various stages. And the first was, working for an accounting firm, then working for a financial institution. So there's different stages in what you get to see, right? When you work for an accounting firm, you have businesses that range from service industries to manufacturing to retail, and you start seeing where opportunities lie, maybe subconsciously, right? Not necessarily very like you're going out there to see, oh, which of these businesses are really making money or where I can fit in. But you start subconsciously building a framework in your mind that, oh, okay, there is opportunity. That's the first thing you realize, there's opportunity, right? And then I think as you go into the financial sector and you start seeing how businesses structure themselves to be, successful, you then start seeing also where certain industries there's gaps where you may have even a client who's struggling to supply a market, and you realize there's a gap in that market, and you see, okay, there's opportunities here, and you start building that database, I think, subconsciously in your mind, and then an opportunity may come one day that you just take a leap and move forward. So it's a bit of everything. I think it's not just saying that I can do this better, but I think a lot of it is when you start observing and you start being part of, in conversations with the people in business, you start realizing that, as I said, opportunities do exist. Yeah.
And we know you started Aquavita and the Caribou brands, and I'm just curious, was it first that you became the founder of this company, or was it first that you were interested in the Association of Manufacturers and then started the brand? I just don't know the timeline of that.
Association of Manufacturers came much, much later. I think in the beginning it was just, I have a co-founder with me, a good friend of mine. And it was basically around, first, I think we should do something. And it was like, what should we do was the next question. And then, we originally started as a fresh juice company. Our first brands were actually fresh juices based on cold chain delivery. Something like what is going on today in the industry 20 years later. But Zambia, I think, was not ready for what we were doing, right? The cold chain supply chain to supermarkets was just not structured well. And we found that within a few years, by accident, we started doing water. And we just concentrated on that, discontinued all the juice lines, and just continued to push growth where it was happening.
And did you also, because I'm trying to think about the pivot, right? That's very critical, because we have many founders and entrepreneurs that are usually attached to the product that they have, and they will go to the grave with that particular product. But what was that process for you? Like, what were some of the indicators? Like you said, there's of course the cold chain value chain, which wasn't as developed as it is right now. I know there's still need for work, but were there some other insights? And what was that decision to say, hey, let's discontinue this, and I think there's something else that's working?
Yes. So let me tell you the story behind Aquavita. Aquavita, basically, with our fresh juices, over the first few years, we found that the competition was substituting to synthetic products. So you had to compete. So we started introducing synthetic products as well, which didn't need cold chain, but basically were the alternative, a chemical that looked like a fruit juice. But because it became so low in terms of value, margins were depleting. But as we were doing juices, we were exporting to Congo. Even the synthetic juices we're exporting to Congo, and we had customers that would say, "Can you load us some water?" Right? And I had a friend of mine who was manufacturing water, but very small part of his business, and we used to buy water from him and send it across to Congo for the rest of our clients. But there were times that he would not be able to supply, right? So we said, well, okay, next step is let us supply it, even though it's 10-15% of our volume of what's going across, and let's see what happens. And when we started, it was actually within probably a year and a half too, we found that water overtook our sales of fresh juices. It was totally different. to what we were experiencing. So we realized that if we're going to put money into something, we need to put it on the water brand. And we let the juices continue for probably another 5-6 years, or probably 10 years actually, before we discontinued it, and let water take the lead. The water was built. Aquavita was building its brand in the background consistently. So we kept investing, expanding the factory, and making sure that we had capacity. We also at the time, probably when we started the water 3 years later, we saw a market in Maheu when Maheu was just starting, and we started that again. 3-4 years, we saw it wasn't making money. We just shelved it. So when you say, people take emotionally attached to brands, yes, there is that mistake with a lot of founders. And we realize we change very quickly. You need to adapt. You need to make what sells, right? That's the key here. You need to make what sells and what you can and have the ability to sell. For example, I may not be very good at selling wall clocks, right? But I'm very good at selling water, right? So you have to know what you can sell. And that's a key factor, in succeeding. So your
about
question,
the fruit juices, by the way, Ashu.
Mm.
Could you tell us the name of the juices?
You grew up in the Copper Belt, so I don't know. There was the first brand which was
Yes, there
fresh
was a
fruits was
guava. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
guava. There
Go
was
ahead.
orange, mango. There was passion fruit. That was under a brand called Fruiton. And
Okay.
then
Okay.
when we started synthetic juices, it was a brand called Alive.
Mm, mm. And how old were you at the time that you were launching this business? And also, the other piece, firstly, let me just double click on what you mentioned. This was a customer driven demand, right? Where you're listening to the customer, they're asking you to supply water. There's this need for more demand, and that's what led your development of even getting into the water side. I thought that was a very valuable lesson and insight to just bring out. But there's an aspect that you mentioned of Congo. This is early in the business, but you were still exploring the DRC market. What led to that particular decision? And maybe if you can just give us some perspective into that.
When you say which decision to explore the DRC market?
DRC market early, because sometimes entrepreneurs would say, can we just saturate, can we penetrate the whole market in Zambia before we move? But it seems like early you were exploring both markets, Zambia and the DRC.
Well, the difference with the DRC is that the clients would come to us because when they, the DRC is at the time was so, it was like so underdeveloped, right, and backward, that if they found a new product on the market, you'd actually find them coming here and pushing us, like, come make an advance payment. We want stock this week. So how do you turn that away, right? It's going to grow your business. And if you're clever enough, you never turn a customer away, right? What you do is you realize that, well, instead of me selling 2 units, I'm selling 5. So what do I need to do is I need to make that money on the extra 3 quickly enough and reinvest it into equipment to make sure that my capacity grows. So it's not something like, you say that I looked for the DRC. I think the DRC looked for us. And I think that was a key change at the time. Now it's a different ballgame. It's like so many manufacturers, so much going on. We have to basically position ourselves to look for the DRC clients.
If you're enjoying this episode, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us reach more people and keep these conversations going. Thanks for your support.
And I realized that sometimes it's not the easiest to move product across borders in Africa or in Zambia. It's landlocked country, so if you want to export, you have to go to other countries as well. So was it also one of those moments when you decided to join the Zambian Association of Manufacturers to kind of change it to make it easier for exporting, because you had this like first-hand experience?
Well, I mean, okay, let me talk about DRC. In those days, we used to export. I mean, our trucks used to go up to across the border and into the country. But then DRC, I think, has an inherent problem with corruption. And eventually, we stopped sending our trucks across and just dropping at the border for everyone to pick up. That's one. But when you look at, when I joined ZAM, it was just like a normal member. No real interest in thinking I was going to lead the organization one day. It was more about, what can ZAM do for me as a member, right? And I think over the years I realized that there was, because I had headed my chamber in Idola before that as president, a few years before that, and then this when I had joined, and then I saw that there was an opportunity to lead the organization and maybe change things. It was an experience I'd had with Idola Chamber. So I thought, okay, let me do this one as well and try and see what we can do for industry. So it was becoming a member of ZAM probably was around 2018 when the business had been in existence for, I would say 20 years, right? We were members in between for about a year or two, and then it was just not going anywhere. And we left it, and then we came back. And then, the opportunity came, and I put myself ahead to run the organization.
And since you said you left and came back, what was the thing you were looking for to gain from it? Like, what was I'm joining ZAM because I need this from it,
Well, look,
this to happen?
Look, sometimes there's two things. One, ZAM is a lobby organization, right? Where you expect policy to be driven for the industry. And two is also you get recognition when you go into supply the mining industry that you're a member of ZAM. Three, you also get friends who are manufacturers and say, hey, come and join the organization. We're looking for membership, see how it goes. And, you go in, not, I think at the time, not to say so much, what are you going to get out of it? But it was more a trial at the time, okay, let's go in, let's see what it's about. You're given a pitch by the people who come in and, enroll you as a member. But you don't really know until you get on and you start getting the understanding of what the organization was able to do.
I'd like to bring it back to the business, Ashu. So we found out that you had to mortgage your family house to raise funding. Could you tell us about your fundraising journey and what have been some of the challenges? That's if you faced any. What did fundraising look like for you, especially through the early years of building the Aquavita brand or business?
Well, look, funding in the old days was, I mean, even now, I think for SMEs, it's very harsh. It's a harsh environment, and unfortunately, Zambia hasn't changed from the to a large extent to the model of having 1.5 times the cover of the loan. So, for example, if you want to borrow 100,000, you must put 150 down, right, in security, with cash, with money at the bank, with your house or property or whatever it is. So, I mean, in those days when we first took our first loan, I don't think it was much. It was, I mean, I think we were buying trucks at the time, and it was from a leasing company that used to be owned by the British government. It was called ICC. And even then, I think to borrow $40,000, it was like give you a home, which was worth much, much more than that. Maybe give a bank deposit collateral, and then you could secure the assets themselves were not enough in those days. Like you couldn't buy trucks without secondary collateral. So it was a very rough time then. What we've seen evolve since then is probably there's still a big demand for collateralization of the loan, and I think people are still facing that problem. But having said that, because we managed things properly, we paid off our loans, then you got to bigger loans, right? I mean, I think we were still in the first 6-7 years, we had gone back to the bank 3-4 times to get new facilities for equipment to upgrade the factory. So all that happened, and was in a way, you paid back your loan, so the business was able to pay and grow at the time.
Were you married by then? I'm just wondering, especially if you're going to go for a $500,000 loan. Like, what was your
Yeah,
was
yeah,
your
yeah.
wife telling you putting that
No, I
business
mean,
money into the
yeah,
business?
yeah. I was married at the time, but that's the time you can take risks. I think I still had a qualification. If I failed in life, I'd go back and be an accountant. So I think that's one of the. But you also sometimes there's entrepreneurs that say don't go in with that concept of having a second option, right? Maybe it worked then, but I don't think it's something that works now. I mean, if you go in, you need to go in wholeheartedly in what you believe in. But it was nice at the time that when you're starting out and you're mortgaging a property, and you still know that if you fail, okay, you'll start again. But that basic principle of you can start again um, is with any entrepreneur. I think if you fail, you will start again, right? So for me, it was I can start again if I want to go back into business, or I can go back into being an employee, which I deep down inside I think knew was not going to happen. So you have
Yeah,
to be all in
essentially.
at time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I wanted to say essentially, like I think the stats are one out of 8 businesses succeed, right? So you always have to be ready that something can go wrong. But uh, like you said, if you are in the lookout for opportunities, they will present to yourself. You don't even have to look for them. Sometimes you just have to, have your eyes open. So I love how you said it in the beginning that you were not just going and asking people, "What should I do? What is the business?" But it just happened. And
Uh,
nowadays to see what is the change essentially. Is there still room for somebody starting a new, like this money intensive product as water manufacturing? What is the enthusiasm about now, what you see on Zambia about starting such a heavy money intensive manufacturing business as water? Is it more looking, people are more looking into digital products, or do you see there is a space for manufacturing?
I think Zambia is there's a lot of work, I think, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, that's been done to restructure the economy, right?
Mhm.
Put Zambia on a sustainable path for the future. And I think, I also sit on the board of ZDA, and what we're seeing is the amount of investment that's coming into manufacturing also, and exploring manufacturing in the country is quite substantial. So manufacturing on a wider scope, I think, is going to grow because the economy is going to grow. The mining industry is growing, and I think a lot of things are happening on the back end to try and grow those industries. When you see IT, look, IT businesses generally burn cash to keep the founder alive long enough to develop his product, using his brain and a couple of laptops. But they do burn substantial cash when they start needing to scale up. And the basic problem is always going to be availability of finance, I think, in this country. To manufacturing can go to debt structured products because you can secure your equipment against it. But when you look at a service industry like IT, you'd have to look and learn how to do capital raises for equity, right? And that's where the challenge, I think, is coming. We've got some bright Zambians in this country, let me tell you. And you see how some of the products they're coming up with, and some of them have got lucky to get some financing to allow them to burn cash to stay afloat while their product was in development stage, or the service was in development stage. I think that's what's missing. It's not the ideas. It's not the ability or the enthusiasm, as you say, from this next generation, or I don't know if you want to call them Gen Zs or Gen whatever, are able to do things that are very different to our time. Manufacturing is always going to be a capital intensive industry, but the advantage of manufacturing, I think, right now is the players that are coming on board, um, or a lot that have been there and have equity to put in and are able to also raise funding from some institutions to expand their operations. But there's a lot, I think, happening. Even in agribusiness, there's a lot going on, right? Zambia in 3-4 years is going to be a different ballgame, my view. You know, um,
So,
And I think I
so
just hope that access to capital becomes a little easier.
based on what I'm understanding, it's actually a better idea to go into manufacturing because of all the variety of resources that you can access. Like you said, mortgage the equipment and so on. So, but the hardest thing is to start, I assume. So, is it actually open for people that have some value added business? I don't know, like something from the future, like 3D printing materials in metal for mining. Is it easy for them to persuade somebody to finance the initial build-up, or that's also tough, like, doing the fundraising for equity in digital products? It makes complete sense to what you're saying, to start the manufacturing business, value added, because then you can mortgage the equipment, bank will talk to you, government will know what you're doing. Makes sense. But the story in the beginning is always the same. Where do I get money to do the essential build up, right? To the first small factory, the first prototype, let's say. So the question was more: is it as difficult to raise for this type of businesses as it is for the digital ones in Zambia, or maybe are there some kind of provisions from the
Yeah,
bank or from the
that's what I
government?
was. Yeah, I was saying there was different types of capital raised, right? And I was trying to differentiate. When you go into a digital side, it's more equity based, Series A, Series B funding when you look at it, or seed funding. When you look at manufacturing, yes, you can try and get family and friends to give you some money to start, but still the entry barrier is a lot bigger, right? Because, for example, if you're running an IT development, you need X $1,000 per month to pay salaries, for example. But when you're starting a manufacturing business, you need everything at once in the beginning to pay for the equipment. So it's not as easy. My point was that I think it's the small companies that need a new structure of financing. And there's a few things that are being done with cooperating partners and other institutions. But I think uh, understanding how to structure it also for some of the new manufacturing businesses is a problem. And they need to be a little more aware, and I think a little more education on how to structure that financing and how manufacturing is not as easy. We're a nation of traders. If you look through our informal economy, right? You buy something for 1 kwacha, you sell it for 2. It's simple maths. But manufacturing is not. That's the same. You need to understand cost centers. You need to understand product costing in a different landscape, or in different inputs. So that part, I think, of understanding a manufacturing business is also a problem. Understanding how it works, how to cost it out, raise the finance for it, how to even get a small loan for a small part of the business, right, or a small manufacturing unit, and then scale up by adding on, like what we did. We started small, right, and when we were lucky enough to find a product that was generating cash flows where we could put money into it and make it grow.
That's brilliant. And to bring it to what you had mentioned earlier with your experience with ZDA, I just wanted to find out, because you've previously, I think you have reframed Zambia from being a landlocked country to being landlinked, right? Which is just basically a shift in mindset around supply chains and how we can target the regional market. Are there opportunities that you're seeing currently, or at least the investments that are being made, pushing towards more local manufacturing and serving the local market, or is it also for both to service these regional markets that we have around us?
I think we're seeing both. I mean, remember, Zambia is no longer an underdeveloped economy in terms of consumption. In the old days, you would be able to sell also anything and everything on the market. People have now developed choice, right? And if you see the quality of products in the manufacturing industry, even in FMCG, the consumable, edible products, they are comparable of what you would find in the region, right? And that way, I think Zambia is positioning itself on regional markets to be able to export as well. I mean, if you've got 8, 9 neighbors that you're connected to, and that's why the border infrastructure that is being pushed by government is so important. Where you find the these new border posts coming up with enhanced facilities, the number of border posts coming up. That's what is also key, right? And when you look at DRC now, from having 3 borders, which was Sakanya, Mukambo, and Kasumbalesa, we've got another 2 opening up in the northwestern front. There's another one coming up, I think, in the northern side. So all these new border posts bring business, right? So on that side, going north, I think definitely big opportunities coming. I think Angola, if we do properly, so we can service the eastern side of Angola, and from our western side, I think good opportunities. The Great Lakes, the through Tanganyika, I think a lot of opportunity there. If we refurbish Mpulungu Port and get it going again, a lot. I think we can become the manufacturing hub of south of the equator, right, and supply regional countries. We can't underestimate Zambia's capacity there.
And how do you navigate, for example, I think in the um, just recently we've seen the Kwacha being notoriously volatile. How have you been able to, because you're serving quite a lot of markets, different markets, how have you been able to like price, plan, and just protect the business due to this dramatic fluctuation of the currency?
Well, look, I mean, the currency has been strengthening quite steadily and sometimes quickly over the last 12, 18 months, I would say. A lot to do with, I think, the fundamentals of the economy, one. But the knock-on effect, it has to draw a balance. And we were talking about this the other day, that it has to, when it gets too strong, Zambia is no longer competitive in the region, because some of the neighboring countries have lower manufacturing costs per unit. And one of the things that was working to our benefit was a weak Kwacha. So when you say volatility and planning, that is one aspect, but becoming overpriced in the region because your currency is too strong is also another problem. So what we've seen is, when currency moves in either direction, first you need to be a bit sensible not to have a knee-jerk reaction. Because what the market doesn't like, especially in manufacturing, is prices going up, prices coming down, and then going up again. So that kind of, I think, principle, I think a lot of our manufacturers have followed to try and keep those prices stable, unless it becomes unbearable for too long that, you need to adjust your pricing. So that's the best way, I think, right now that most businesses are planning, because you don't send wrong signals to the market and start overpricing your product. Having said that, you also, for the export market, eventually your prices adjust. The good thing about Zambia is market is also driving on how prices settle. It's not like in the 70s and 80s where prices were controlled. It will eventually settle to a market-driven pricing. And if your raw material costs come down, your kwacha price also will be affected in that proportion, to some extent, to come down. And you can still remain competitive. So you just have to be a bit, I think, mindful on the local market, and not to have knee-jerk reactions, but on your international market or regional market, be very dynamic in adapting your prices as soon as possible.
I saw that as a president of the ZAM, you were traveling quite around the world, especially to Japan. I saw, and I'm wondering, what is the cooperation between like these high-tech Japanese companies coming to Zambia? Is it more trying to import their products, or maybe open factories? What is that cooperation that Zambia is looking for going abroad? If you are enjoying this episode, take a second to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to reach more people and keep these conversations going. Thank you for your support.
Look, I mean, even when I was president, when I was traveling, us always trying to push the agenda of stop doing business with Zambia at arm's length. When we say arm's length, technology-based countries were always, or let's have an agent in Zambia, or let's supply from our country by, supply product and no real manufacturing base. And I think the idea there was, look, you need to invest in the future for the next 15 years. And assuming that, if you look at technological products, for example, for the mines, there's DRC around us, there's Malawi's mining, Botswana is mining, Zimbabwe is mining, Angola is mining, Namibia is also mining. If you took the view that let's make a regional hub in Zambia, right, to service these 9 countries or 8 countries, and also have a semi-established sort of like value addition base or, manufacturing base, then, you are going to be taken seriously as well. Because what's going to happen in the long run is other countries that have copy your technology, right, or come up with similar alternative technologies, suddenly start seeing value in point of presence, what we call POPs, right? It's if you are present in an economy at arm's length, right, you will end up with the benefits at arm's length. If you are present in an economy and establish for the long term, and you establish manufacturing centers, you get the benefits of not only the economy, but the regional trading blocks as well. So this is what the message that we kept trying to send out is, learn to do business in Zambia rather than with Zambia, right? Be here, be present.
To all of this, Ashu, governments do play a key role, right, in ensuring that there's just efficient and fair trade when it comes to manufacturing. And I would like us to talk about the gap between policy and the business reality of it. So from your seat, both as an entrepreneur and as a former ZAM president, how wide do you think this gap is in Zambia right now? And what is one thing that would actually narrow this gap?
Between policy and?
The business reality, right? So we would like to imagine that there are certain constraints from a business side that could easily be changed or moved by policy. So what could narrow these gaps around policy to create a more enabling environment?
Yeah, you see, it's a double-edged sword. We have this system we inherited of how we enact laws and what really pushes them. And what we're finding is that the business environment, while it is stable, continues to have new legislation around what we call hygiene factors. And that's where the problem is beginning to lie, that the over-regulation of business is becoming an issue, right? The macroeconomic environment is not the issue. So where I'm going with this is you can have political will to change things, right? But the bureaucratic will to have it slow down so that the bureaucracy, maintains its relevance is one of the key problems. And I think you've seen the head of state has been talking about this as well, that look, get rid of the red tape. I keep telling you guys, get rid of the red tape. But having a direction given and having it implemented by those in bureaucracy that see the need, create over regulation so that you create jobs in civil service, for example. Those are the problems, I think, that are the reality of what we're trying to say, that look, don't over-regulate business. A lot of businesses that are thriving in other parts of the world are not over-regulated like this. I think we're doing that part where we are creating a lot of new laws that have very punitive repercussions for employers and entrepreneurs. It may come to bite us in the future, if not now already. I mean, look, you will still grow a business. Zambia still got good environment for establishing a business, growing it, but I think it would grow a lot faster if we didn't have some of these overregulation. I mean, the number of licenses, that we have to get into business and maintain business, it's horrendous.
Yeah, I saw the same
So
issue in Czech Republic, where we have the same conversation about too much red tape. And in some degree, it's already discouraging people from starting new businesses because they see these stories on TV that somebody was busted not having the right license. But there's so many laws that's so hard to figure it out. So in one sense, this produces this you're almost certain that you will not adhere to every single regulation there is, and so people are not even trying in the end, or they just try and don't care, so they just go very like a punk chaotic in that way, and therefore this lot of regulation, at least in my perspective, sometimes is very counterproductive for the economy at large. So I'm glad you mentioned it, and I'm glad that it's working on it, because I saw it while starting a Zambian company is very easy from even from Czech Republic. This could be an issue down the way. So it was just my comment that you guys are not alone in that. We are struggling with the same thing.
No. Okay.
And for me, I since we're on policy side, I also wanted to get your perspective on. We have been quite heavily dependent on copper, right, as a nation. But now you can see a lot more opportunities coming up when it comes to minerals, right? And there could be a need for us to actually go on and see how best we can have these minerals available. So what's your perspective? Because I know on one side you also push on the other side of value addition in the manufacturing field. So what's your perspective on these two, this dynamic where we have to extract more minerals and also the value addition and manufacturing continuing? Yeah.
There's a study somewhere done, I need to remember the numbers, but for between an extracted copper cathode plate and a winding for a transformer, the value that you add on copper probably is 3 to 4 times, in terms of margins and in terms of bringing that product to market. What we need to start realizing and what we've been pushing is, you can have the resource and you can have the will to add value, but if you don't have access to the resource, there's no point. So you can create all the taxes, the policies, and everything, but if all your copper is always going to be exported, right, and not available to local manufacturing, you are not going to have the game changer. So you have to have a policy shift on ensuring that a part of the production of copper progressively starts remaining in country and becomes available at the right fair pricing to local manufacturers. And I'll give you an example, is that copper is priced in Zambia at LME, right? Now, LME includes, if any local manufacturer has to buy it, they have to buy it as if they're buying it at a warehouse in London or in Singapore, because LME is based on LME warehouse price. Now, what we've been saying for a time is, why should we pay for transport or insurance or management fees for something that doesn't leave the border? And that's like a policy shift that just can be a game changer. It might make a difference of $150, $200 a ton, but makes you very competitive on a truckload of copper, right, in production. So these small changes or policy shifts around access to resource is where Zambia needs to go, and what a lot of African countries need to do, right? It's good enough to have a mining industry, which the country needs, no argument there. What it does need is a roadmap to say, look, for every 1,000 tons you make, 100 tons is going to be sold on a local market on first right of refusal basis. So that if the local market doesn't buy it, then you can export it. Fair enough. But you start allowing for that raw material to become available. Same will happen with lithium, with tin, with cobalt. All the new critical minerals that are starting to come online. You need to start having a deliberate policy around a differential pricing to make sure that the product is available for the entrepreneur, the manufacturer, to add value. You shouldn't be paying a premium price or a price based on the London or Singapore warehousing for you to add value here. The margin that if you can bring that preferential pricing in or fair pricing in, you will see a lot more factories being set up here. A lot more.
Unfortunate that you almost can't access your own resource, right? Very unfortunate. And because usually when I think about it, which is when we talk about value addition on copper or any other minerals that we have, what are your thoughts about who exactly should come into that space? Are we looking at Zambian entrepreneurs coming together to build these manufacturing plants that add value to it? Or is it kind of like a case where we have to call on either international and foreign investors to partner with us in order to build these industries? What does that look like for you, the roadmap for getting to value addition for these critical minerals?
When I look at the value addition sector, for me, the critical factor is how many jobs do you create? Whether a Zambian entrepreneur does it or a foreign guy does it, I think it doesn't matter. We have laws in place around foreign direct investment, about bringing investment into Zambia. I mean, the amount of money that ZDA spends on trying to get people to invest in Zambia is a lot. So now if we start saying, should it be a Zambian entrepreneur or should it be a foreign entrepreneur? What is our game plan for the next 5 years, right? Is to create X thousand number of jobs. Whose money does it? Does it matter? No. But there's Zambian entrepreneurs out there who have money, who have some knowledge of manufacturing and are doing this, are putting in money on certain industries. But I always am very wary of this, this should be reserved for us. And no, reserve the resource for us. Whether we choose to take that step, right, to add value to it, is the important decision. Whether we have the money to do it, that's a separate discussion. But we should not be differentiating the color of money, if you want to get what I'm saying. Right? Does it create the jobs? Does it create revenue for the government? Does it create taxes, which can now be spent on social services? We always complain about, what we don't have, right? I had this question once in a forum, and I gave the example. I said, you it was a bit far-fetched, but it was like, you only realize that you had a potential girlfriend when someone takes it from you. And that's when you cry up and say, no, that was supposed to be mine, right? And it's the same thing. You look at potential and you don't want to act on it. Your potential, and then you say, no, foreigners must not invest in Zambia. Totally wrong concept, right? There is a lot of opportunity in Zambia, a lot of opportunity for everyone, whether you are Zambian or you are a foreigner. But yes, the foreigners have got the money. Let's understand what is the problem. They have access to finance that we do not have. And that's why the last month's announcement that the Development to replace DBZ is coming back. That should drive now industrialization that backs Zambians, right? And who have a little bit of capital and who need a sizable amount of capital to buy equipment to add value. We must just drive the agenda of creating jobs.
I love that.
With that message that we need to create jobs for the youth, which Zambia is one of the youngest countries in the world, is important to mention that you call yourself a student of life. Just like this youth people are, in most cases, they are students of life, even their young life. So what do you think is the most important lesson that you learned in your life that cannot be taught in textbooks or classrooms or from teachers themselves?
you'll always grow your business through a network, right? But I mean, I always say this, and when there was one lecture I'd given where there's two aspects to your life in terms of how you grow. Is those that are close to you in terms of who you can trust, and those that you need to know for a business. So I always say, keep your network big and your circle small, because your circle small is who's you're going to rely on in the bad days, in your your family, your friends, and your network is who's you're going to grow your business. So if you can maybe follow that principle, I think uh, if you will grow your business. Keep your network big, keep your circle small.
Brilliant. And I'd like to, as we close, I would like to find out, what does success look like now for you at this stage of your life? Do you still enjoy that thrill of business, or has the definition shifted towards something else entirely?
Look, life must, it's how do you live a balanced life, right? So yeah, okay, you have a successful business, you contribute to the economy, but then you find maybe there's other ways of making life better for other people. I mean, I think I've had a very blessed life, to be honest. You know, uh, I look back and I know that the man upstairs, God, is always looking down and taking care of what I need to do or what my needs are. So having the drive to grow a business, I don't think anyone really loses it. But I think what you do find sometimes is other interests that make you grow as an individual, like what I did at the manufacturing industry, right? It was not a paid job, right? It wasn't something that I was earning money from. But I think what you get a self-realization or fulfillment from is sit down and you look back and you say, did you change something in this country for the betterment of everyone? And I hope the answer is yes, right? It's not always about the money. And most entrepreneurs, when they drive businesses, success, I think if you ask them, it's not about money. It's about creating. So you create a product, you create value, you create something of that is, whether you want to call it your legacy or whatever it is. But what you do is you change something. And that's what it is. It's about changing something, whether it's a raw material or an environment or policy, bringing that balanced life into your vision, right, of what you want to do. I think is very important. So business is one part. As you grow and life changes, there's a lot of things that come in that can drive you. Learn to adapt to what drives you.
So essentially, it's you learn how to. The most rewarding thing is to learn how to change things and adapt, because that way you can affect people's lives. That's what I got from the message. That's important to improve people's lives in some way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, you take nothing with you, right?
Yeah. True.
You don't.
True. So if
All you take.
yeah.
My father said to me, all you take to the grave is your name. That's it.
Yeah. True. And the Greek philosophy says, "And 2 coins for the guy that takes you across the river Styx." So that's about it. So if somebody wants to reach out to talk about your company, about Aquavita, about manufacturing, is there a way where they can find you easily, or would you like us to provide them with some kind of contact email or anything like that?
My email's floating everywhere. I mean, and you can circulate it. I mean, it's not a problem. I mean, there's a lot of platforms that you could, probably reach out to me on, and it's just that sometimes people must not feel that I'm ignoring them because I'm just overwhelmed with stuff to do. I don't want them to get into that situation. I mean, I do take time out in some of the mentorship programs and other stuff, but I'm happy to engage. but it would be more, if you want me to start looking after you like a little baby and I don't honestly. There's other people out there that can probably do it. I can have a 2-minute conversation. My conversation with me would be, okay, what? Get to the point. What do you want to ask, right? What do you want to ask? This is my advice. This is what I think you should do. Move on. Instead of getting into a 10-minute conversation about the color of the sky before you get to the point. No, I don't have time for that.
Yeah, it seems like I need to get better at this too, based on our conversation today. So, thank you, Ashu, for taking time and spending more than 2 minutes with us today. It's been an hour, and thank you for sharing your experience. I didn't talk too much, but I learned a lot. I was listening even more. So,
Okay,
thank you.
great talking to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us on Beyond the Pivot. Remember to subscribe, follow, and share this episode with anyone passionate about Africa's future in business. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and shaping the future of African entrepreneurship.